I walked into the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel wearing the best suit I owned, a charcoal gray number I'd bought 3 years ago for my promotion to shift supervisor, and felt pride swell in my chest as I watched my son Kieran adjust his bow tie at the altar. 26 years of raising him alone, of working double shifts at the Ford plant to pay for his college, of driving him to debate tournaments and science fairs in my beat-up Chevy. And here he was marrying the daughter of Chicago's most prominent cardiothoracic surgeon. I found my assigned table near the front and froze when I saw the elegant cream nameplate sitting beside the centerpiece, Dominic Torino, low education. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I looked around the room filled with doctors, lawyers, and business executives, all of whom would see exactly what Kieran's new in-laws thought of the man who'd sacrificed everything to raise their son-in-law. 26 years of love, dedication, and sleepless nights reduced to two words that branded me as unworthy of belonging in their world. My name is Dominic Torino, and before that Saturday evening in June taught me exactly what some people think of working-class fathers, I believed that love and sacrifice spoke louder than diplomas and bank accounts. Every morning for the past 18 years, I've punched in at 6 a.m. at Ford's Chicago assembly plant, where I inspect brake systems on F-150s rolling down Line 3. My hands are permanently stained with metal shavings and hydraulic fluid. My back aches from bending over engines for 8 hours straight, but I've never missed a day of work since Kieran's mother died when he was 8 years old. Our house sits on a quiet street in Cicero, a two-bedroom bungalow with aluminum siding and a front porch where Kieran used to do his homework while I grilled dinner on an old Weber kettle. The neighborhood isn't fancy, chain-link fences, pickup trucks and driveways, kids playing street hockey until the street lights come on, but it's honest work that pays for honest living. After Maria passed, that house became our universe. Just me and Kieran figuring out how to be a family without her gentle presence holding us together. I raised that boy with the same values my father taught me: work hard, keep your word, and treat people with respect regardless of what they drive or where they went to school. When Kieran brought home straight A's, we celebrated at Tony's Pizza. When he scored the winning goal in high school soccer, I took him to Wrigley Field. When Northwestern offered him a full academic scholarship, I cried in the garage for 20 minutes because I knew Maria would have been so proud. Every milestone, every achievement, every moment of his success felt like validation that love could overcome any obstacle. If this hits close to home, make sure you're subscribed. Some stories need to be heard. Meeting Kieran's girlfriend Vivian for the first time should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. He'd talked about her for months: brilliant, beautiful, passionate about pediatric medicine, everything he'd ever wanted in a partner. When he finally brought her home for Sunday dinner, I spent the entire weekend cleaning the house and researching wine pairings for the pot roast I'd learned to make from Maria's recipe. Vivian was everything Kieran had described and more, but she came with baggage I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Charles Whitmore, her father, who arrived unannounced during dessert to collect his daughter. The man walked into my modest living room like he was touring a museum exhibit, his eyes cataloging everything from the secondhand furniture to the family photos on the mantel. When I offered him coffee, he declined with the kind of polite smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the expression wealthy people use when they're trying not to touch things they consider beneath them. The real betrayal started slowly, through conversations I wasn't meant to overhear. Dr. Whitmore would call Vivian while she was at our house, and I'd catch fragments of his side of the relationship, concerns about Kieran's background, questions about my ability to contribute to wedding expenses, suggestions that perhaps they should wait until after medical school to get serious. He never said anything directly insulting, but his meaning was clear. His daughter deserved better than the son of a factory worker, regardless of Kieran's accomplishments or character. The worst moment came 3 months before the wedding, when Vivian left her phone on our kitchen counter and it buzzed with a text from her father. I didn't mean to read it, but the preview was right there on the lock screen. "Have you considered what people will think when they meet his father at the country club?" That single sentence revealed everything. To Dr. Whitmore, I wasn't a person with my own worth and dignity. I was an embarrassment to be managed, a social liability that might reflect poorly on his family's reputation. The nameplate wasn't an accident or an oversight by some wedding planner. It was a calculated message designed to put me in my place in front of 200 of Chicago's elite. I sat there staring at those words, feeling heat creep up my neck as other guests began filtering to their tables, each one glancing at the nameplate before looking at me with expressions ranging from pity to amusement. Dr. Whitmore's colleagues from Northwestern Memorial were seated at the table beside mine, and I watched them notice the designation, whisper among themselves, and then study me like I was a curiosity they'd never encountered up close. The ceremony itself became a blur of suppressed rage and profound sadness. I watched my son marry the woman he loved while knowing that her family had branded me as someone whose presence needed to be explained and apologized for. During the father-son dance, Kieran kept asking if I was okay, if I was feeling well, clearly sensing something was wrong but not understanding what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the nameplate. This was his wedding day, his moment of joy, and I wouldn't let anyone steal that from him, not even his new in-laws. The breaking point came during the reception dinner, when Dr. Whitmore stood to give his toast. He spoke eloquently about Vivian's accomplishments, about the bright future ahead for two young doctors, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who share your values and aspirations. Then, with what I now recognize as deliberate cruelty, he made a point of acknowledging all the family members present, thanking them for their contributions to the young couple's success. He mentioned Vivian's mother's philanthropy work, her uncle's position at the Federal Reserve, her grandfather's legacy in academic medicine. When he got to me, he paused, smiled that same cold smile I'd seen in my living room, and simply said he was grateful for everyone who had played a role in bringing these two exceptional people together. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about class or education, this was about control. Dr. Whitmore was establishing a hierarchy that would define every future interaction, every holiday gathering, every grandchild's birthday party. He was making sure everyone understood that while I might be tolerated in their world, I would never be accepted as an equal. I left the reception early, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely untrue, and drove home through streets that felt familiar and foreign at the same time. My house looked smaller somehow, shabbier, like seeing it through Dr. Whitmore's eyes had changed its very dimensions. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd helped Kieran with calculus homework, where we'd planned his college applications, where he'd told me about his dreams of becoming a doctor, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The lowest point came around 2 a.m. when I found myself going through old photo albums, looking at pictures of Kieran growing up. There he was at age 10, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up his first-place science fair trophy. At 14, suited up for his first formal dance, nervous and excited. At 18, graduation day, throwing his cap in the air with a smile that could have lit up the whole city. In every photo, every memory, every milestone, I saw the same thing, a father who had given everything he had to raise a good man. But somewhere in the darkness of that sleepless night, I remembered something my own father had told me when I was young and angry about kids at school who looked down on us because we lived in the wrong neighborhood. He said that respect isn't something you can demand or inherit, it's something you earn by showing people exactly who you are when they least expect it. The difference between a man and a boy, he'd said, wasn't education or money or social status. It was knowing your own worth and making sure the world knew it too. I spent the rest of that night planning, not from anger or hurt pride, but from a crystal-clear understanding of what needed to happen next. Dr. Whitmore had made the mistake of assuming that working class meant powerless, that lack of formal education meant lack of intelligence. He was about to learn exactly how wrong those assumptions could be. The first step was research, and I approached it with the same methodical precision I brought to quality control inspections at the plant. I spent weeks learning everything I could about Dr. Whitmore's professional life, his hospital affiliations, his research publications, his position on various medical boards. What I discovered was a man whose reputation was built on careful image management and strategic networking, someone who valued appearance above almost everything else. My initial plan was too emotional, too personal. I wanted to humiliate him the way he'd humiliated me. I considered showing up at his country club, confronting him at hospital functions, making scenes that would embarrass him in front of his peers. But every scenario I played out ended with me looking unhinged and him looking like the victim of an unstable factory worker's grudge. I realized I was thinking like someone who had something to prove rather than someone who knew his own worth. The breakthrough came during a conversation with my neighbor Frank Kowalski, a retired Chicago Fire Department captain who'd spent 30 years saving lives without needing a medical degree to validate his contributions. Frank mentioned that his grandson was struggling in pre-med at Northwestern, failing organic chemistry despite tutoring and extra study sessions. When I suggested that maybe the kid needed to learn from someone who understood complex systems from the ground up, Frank looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But then I explained my idea, and his expression changed to something approaching admiration. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. I would use my actual skills and knowledge to demonstrate exactly what Dr. Whitmore had dismissed as low education. I started quietly, tutoring Frank's grandson and 2 other pre-med students who were struggling with the mathematical concepts underlying chemistry and physics. Within 6 weeks, all 3 students saw dramatic improvements in their grades. Word spread through the study groups and tutoring centers, and soon I had a waiting list of Northwestern students who needed help understanding the practical applications of theoretical concepts. The confrontation came 6 months after the wedding at Northwestern Memorial Hospital's annual research symposium, an event Dr. Whitmore had organized to showcase the hospital's commitment to advancing medical knowledge. I attended as the guest of Dr. Sarah Chin, a young resident who'd been struggling with a research project on automotive safety systems and their applications to emergency medicine. She'd contacted me through one of my tutoring students, desperate for help understanding how modern brake systems could inform protocols for treating crush injuries. The research we developed together was groundbreaking, a comprehensive analysis of how automotive safety innovations could be applied to emergency room trauma protocols. Dr. Chen presented our findings to a packed auditorium, crediting me as her primary research partner and emphasizing how my expertise in automotive engineering had been essential to the project's success. The presentation received a standing ovation and immediate interest from several major medical journals. Dr. Whitmore was in the audience, and I watched his expression change as he realized who I was and what I'd accomplished. The man who'd branded me as low education was witnessing me being introduced as a collaborative researcher whose practical knowledge was advancing medical science in ways his theoretical understanding never could. When Dr. Chin invited me to join her at the podium for questions, I saw something I'd never expected to see in his eyes: respect. The most satisfying moment came during the post-presentation reception, when Dr. Whitmore approached me with what looked like genuine contrition. He congratulated me on the research, acknowledged the value of my practical expertise, and even mentioned that Northwestern was considering developing a program to connect working professionals with medical researchers who needed real-world applications for their theoretical work. He never explicitly apologized for the nameplate or his previous dismissiveness, but his entire demeanor had changed from condescending tolerance to professional recognition. But the real victory wasn't his acknowledgement, it was the realization that I'd never needed his approval in the first place. I'd spent months trying to prove my worth to someone whose opinion didn't matter, when I should have been demonstrating my value to people who could actually benefit from what I had to offer. The research partnership with Dr. Chin led to other collaborations, and within a year I was working with medical professionals across Chicago on projects that bridged the gap between theoretical medicine and practical engineering. I kept my job at Ford. I liked the steady rhythm of it, the tangible satisfaction of ensuring every brake system met safety standards, but my evenings were now filled with research meetings, data analysis, and the kind of intellectual challenges I'd never imagined pursuing. Kieran was amazed by the transformation, proud in a way that was different from his childhood admiration. He'd always seen me as a dedicated father who'd sacrificed for his future. Now he saw me as someone with expertise and insights that even his medical school professors respected. The shift in our relationship was subtle but profound. We were no longer just father and son, but 2 adults who could appreciate each other's professional accomplishments. The most unexpected change was in how I saw myself. For years, I defined my identity through my role as Kieran's father, measuring my success by his achievements rather than my own. The research work helped me understand that intelligence and education aren't the same thing, that practical knowledge has its own value, and that respect is earned through competence and character, not credentials and connections. I started teaching evening classes at a community college, helping working adults understand the mathematical and engineering principles behind the systems they worked with every day. The students were mechanics, factory workers, technicians, and repair specialists who'd been told they weren't smart enough for higher education. Watching them discover their own analytical abilities, seeing their confidence grow as they realized they could understand complex concepts, became more rewarding than any professional recognition I received. 2 years after that wedding, Vivian and Kieran hosted Thanksgiving dinner at their new house, and I noticed something had changed in how Dr. Whitmore interacted with me. He asked thoughtful questions about my research, listened to my opinions with genuine interest, and even mentioned that he'd recommended my tutoring services to colleagues whose children were struggling with pre-med requirements. The nameplate incident was never discussed, but its shadow had been erased by something more powerful: mutual respect earned through demonstrated competence. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be about tearing someone down. Sometimes it's about building yourself up so high that their attempts at diminishment become irrelevant. Dr. Whitmore's opinion of me had mattered because I'd allowed it to define my worth. Once I started defining that worth through my own contributions and capabilities, his approval became unnecessary. The house in Cicero looks exactly the same from the outside, but inside it feels different now, not smaller or shabbier, but comfortable and authentic. It's the home of someone who knows his own value, who doesn't need external validation to feel worthy of respect. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't changing how others see you, but discovering who you really are when you stop seeing yourself through their eyes.